This video is sponsored by Blizzard. To celebrate the release of World of Warcraft's brand new expansion, The War Within, I've been tasked to build one of the new mounts coming to the game. I'm building the Shackled Shadow, and this is a mount that your player character can ride on, and it's available from the vendor in Hallowfall. The War Within is a new expansion pack for World of Warcraft, so if you've played it before, then it's a great time to get back into it, and a great time to take a look if you've never played it before. There are 4 new diverse zones full of never-seen-before wonders to face the evil of Xal'atath's grasp upon the Nerubian Empire. There are also new dungeons and a new raid. The Journey to the Centre of the World theme is also represented by the Delves feature, which is a new seasonal bite-sized rewarding feature that can be played solo or with groups of up to 5. The Shackled Shadow mount doesn't have any legs and it looks like it's floating around, so I decided it would be ideal if we can make a full animatronic character which balances on a ball. I've built quite a few omnidirectional robot projects before, and a lot of balancing robot projects that you can check out in my channel, so it shouldn't be too hard to use some Omni wheels to drive a ball around and make the robot balance on top.
There are quite a few 3D printed parts in this project, and we've got to make everything 3 times for the 3 wheels, including 3 wheel mounts and 3 pulleys so that we can drive those wheels. I also made this part with a 1.2mm nozzle that holds a stick in the middle that's going to support the rest of the robot. Here are my 3 lots of everything laid out for the 3 wheels, and all these parts are Pro PLA+, so they should be nice and tough. Each third of the design has 2 halves, and each of those halves has 2 bearings to support the axle for the wheel at each end. So I've got these pieces that fit into the bearings, which are like little bushings, and they've got a square hole in them, and that means I can put a square axle in, which I can fix in nice and tight, and it won't spin round independently, and I can lock it in place. We need some fairly high power motors to drive this project, so we've got enough torque, so I'm using O-Drive 100kV brushless motors and O-Drive S1 motor drivers. The motors come with a magnet on the back and there's an encoder on the S1 board, and those fit together with a sandwich kit with some metal plates. The driver and the encoder allow us to either control velocity, position or torque really accurately, which is what we need for a balancing robot. So those go into one half of the assembly that has one of those bearings in. We've got a pulley mounted on the motor, and there we've got some 2020 extrusion which is fitted through one of my square bushings. And that means we can make a belt reduction which is about 3.3 to 1, so that we can get lots of torque on that axle. Obviously we've got the other plate which has the other square bushing in, and it also has a bolt through it, and that bolt fits into a bearing in the end of the pulley so that we can keep the tension on, and that means that assembly is nice and strong and it all screws together. And that means we can keep belt tension and there's no slop in the design. So that's looking pretty tight. There is a bit of slack in the belt though, but I left provision to put an idler in, which I've just 3D printed to be exactly the right size, and that fits on another axle and just stretches that belt a little bit more, so now it's nice and tight. I also made this bridge piece that goes between the 2 plates and covers the pulley. And of course I've been making all 3 of those assemblies all along, and those all fit together so that we get those axles at 120 degrees apart. There's a flat piece on each one and the next one screws on, so if I screw all of those together we should see that what's emerging is this triangular piece, and all those axles are 120 degrees apart when we look at it from the top. And that makes the whole assembly to hold 3 wheels. There's a recess on each of those as well, which I've cunningly left with some bolt holes in, and that's for that part printed with the 1.2mm nozzle, so it's super tough, and that's going to hold the rest of the structure. So that fits in the middle just like that. I bought these metal Omni wheels which can hold quite a bit of mass because it's going to build up as we build this project, and those are wheels with little wheels all around them, and you'll notice there's 2 rows of wheels so it covers all the gaps, and that means it can roll like a normal wheel and also slide sideways. Each of those has another bushing fitted to it essentially with a square hole in, which is bolted into its metal hub. And that of course means they can fit on my square 2020 extrusion axles, and we can position them and slide them up and down.
And of course we've got a ball, which is just a basketball that fits in there, and that's going to be great because as the wheels turn it can move in all directions, and then hopefully we can tune it up and make it balance with an inertial measurement unit and all the stuff we normally put in a balancing robot. The only issue at the moment is this is quite a lot of mass, and we've got quite a lot of mass to put on top of that, and of course this ball is squashy. Even though I've pumped it up hard, I'm pretty sure it's going to sort of just squish in there and get jammed, so I'm going to have to consider whether we can get a ball that's less squashy, like a rigid ball, or perhaps we need to get a rigid ball and skin it with this ball so we've got loads of grip. Yep, pretty sure this is definitely going to be a problem.
It's time to be innovative, and this ball fits on my 3D printer bed, so I'm printing a ball with a 1.2mm nozzle again, so it's nice and tough. I've made that in 2 hemispheres, which are hollow, and I've also got this ring piece, which is contoured to glue into one of them to kind of make a thing so we can glue the other one on and get it all perfectly aligned, and hopefully it's strong enough it doesn't just split apart with the mass of the whole robot on. So I'm using super glue and activator here, which means it will go off as soon as I put that together. I don't have to hold it for ages, and then I'm going to skin that with basketball skin, which is actually made in 2 parts. There's a nice tough membrane inside as well that holds the air, but I've taken that out because it's really grippy, and that meant it was really hard to get the skin on. Without it, I can just slip the outer on, and that can be glued because it's nice and textured as well. I put electronics in the robot, so we've got all of our O drives wired in, with power and with CAN bus. The main controller is a Teensy 4.1, but I've also got the Dynamixel interface on there for the servos that are going to control the arms, and I've got the SparkFun B&O 087 inertial measurement unit, which is what I've used in lots of other recent balancing robot projects. So initially it looks like it might work okay. We should have lots of power, and we've got a nice grippy ball and some substantial Omni wheels. But there's been quite a few problems actually tuning this up. Sometimes it kind of works, but actually it's been pretty tricky, and normally that means there's something wrong with the mechanical design, because when you've got such high power motors and quite a lot of mass, it should be easy. What I actually found was there wasn't enough torque on the motors, so if I hold them, I just push them down against the ball, the wheels won't spin anymore, till I pick them up and then they spin away. So basically I can stop the wheels with my hand. We've got quite a lot more mass to put on here, so this is going to be a real problem. I've designed some parts that retrofit to the parts I've already printed, which is an extension and another 1 to 1.3 reduction, so we can get 3 times as much torque. So I'm printing an intermediate pulley and all of those parts, and then that's fitted on, so this now makes these 3 pieces quite a bit longer with the intermediate reduction in the middle, but we're going to get far more torque on that Omni wheel, probably 3 times as much. To achieve the same velocity, the motors also have to go 3 times faster, and there's plenty of overhead, but that means I'm driving 3 times more power into them, so I've actually got much more torque here, and I can't stop those wheels with my hand anymore, which is good. So this has been much easier to tune up. I can also remote control it. This is my universal remote that I made in another video, which is a DSM remote with a DSM module and a DSM receiver. So I can rotate on the spot by adding some velocity to all of the wheels, and I can upset the set point of the PID controller to try and drive it forwards and backwards. However, any fast acceleration seems to cause me some real issues. If you imagine balancing a stick on your hand, it's much easier if the stick is taller because it has more mass and therefore it doesn't move as quick with the same force, so basically it doesn't thrash around as much. So I've made the rest of most of the structure here, and I've also put the batteries higher up, so we get a higher point of inertia. This is actually balancing much better now. Driving by remote control also works a little bit better. You'll notice I've got a different ball here we'll talk about in a moment, but there's still some quite bad problems if I try to make it accelerate fast and the ball just buffets around between the wheels. This is actually a smooth dog's ball, which hasn't got much grip on it. It looks like there's quite a lot of wheel spin, so with the grippy ball it's actually much worse because the wheels grip it and that pushes it around between all the wheels in a kind of buffeting motion, whereas a smoother ball it actually slips past and gives me less problems. But there's still an issue of why there's quite a lot of wheel spin when it accelerates fast. I made this additional piece, which is basically a ring that's going to fit on the bottom, and I'm going to use that to try and hold the ball in place. So this has lots of little Omni wheels all the way around on the inside with adjusters, so I can adjust them to just touch the ball, and hopefully that'll stop the buffeting motion. I found this ball as well on a garden supply website, which is made of mirrored stainless steel, and that's going to look quite good in the robot. So that fits onto the bottom on some bolt holes already there for one of the axles for one of the pulleys, and this ball fits in perfectly, and that should stop it moving all about. So let's give that a quick test and see what happens. Initially it balances just as well as it did before, because it's at low velocity and everything's looking good on that ball, but however, if we try and do fast acceleration, then we still get quite a lot of wheel spin. The ball doesn't move out of place now, but the wheels just slip past. That ball is much smoother and shinier, but that's still not really solved the issue. I've got several theories about what's happening here, but for now what we're going to do is just tune the robot up really well so that it doesn't have to accelerate fast. That pretty much means it's going to have to stay on the spot, we can't drive it around or make it do any outlandish things, but for now that's balancing pretty well, considering that it's a ball that it's balancing on and has to compensate in 2 axes. So I'm pretty happy with that for what it is. What seems to be happening here is that the grippier balls, the blue ball and also the orange ball, are much worse, and the orange ball in fact is getting completely carved up, so the wheels are still spinning even though it's more grippy, but it's just cutting the rubber to pieces. So I think that my wheels aren't at the optimal angle, and basically there's friction between them and they're fighting each other, and that's why it's tearing the balls up.
So that's working the best it can, which I'm actually pretty happy with, so it's time to think about the rest of the body sections. Before that though, I'm going to tell you a bit more about the new features in World of Warcraft's new expansion, The War Within. The Horde and Alliance will welcome a new allied race, the Earthen, among their ranks. At the feature level, this theme will also be embraced by warbands, which is a new system that will make playing alts easier and more rewarding, making the player's alts essentially a family of characters who share resources, progression, and fight together for Azeroth. New hero talent trees will allow players to expand their battle arsenal while developing the classes fantasy through 39 new archetypes.
This whole thing still needs to look like the Shackled Shadow though, and it also needs animatronic arms and head, so we've got quite a lot of cosmetic features to add to it. My prop building friend Billy came along to help with this part. In reality, I was still panicking trying to make the ball balancing robot work, so I really needed some help. Billy's got a really good eye for form, so she's an ideal person to help me out build all the cosmetics. The hands were carved out of foam, and then Billy made this sort of sculpture for the head, which was free-formed out of some old packing foam, and then she made templates over it using tape and paper, which were cut off in pieces, pinned onto foam and traced around, and then foam templates were made from the paper. So essentially it's a bit like a Peppercura template for foam, but all made by hand, by eye. So all of those foam pieces were glued and pieced back together, and that made the whole structure for the head. The Shackled Shadow appears to have glowing eyes, so I 3D printed some eyes in translucent TPU and then hot glued 10 LEDs in the back of each one, which are white. So they're going to light up great and look great in the video. The head and hands need to move, and it's fairly big, so I've got some fairly high-powered servos here. We're using Dynamixel servos, which are around 100 kilograms centimeters torque, and these are the XM540W270Ts for those who celebrate. There's also a 2-to-1 gear reduction on these because we have to move those huge arms around and also the head fairly convincingly without straining the servos. So each servo is mounted in a block there, and then it's got a gear on it, and there's a stainless steel rod stuck into the print, there's a nylon washer, and then there's the gear, and that is a 2-to-1 ratio, so we get twice as much torque and half as much speed. But it's only going to move quite slowly, so this is fine. That fits right on there, and then the gears mesh, so you can see that we've got that much bigger ratio than we would have if we just used the servo. The arms themselves are made of 2 carbon fibre rods and some other 3D prints. So the gear at the upper arm on the shoulder fits into those rods, and that's going to be glued in, and there's another spacer further down. My elbows of course contain another servo and another rod, so the servo fits in that gap, and then there's another gear that fits on there, and then that makes the lower arm. So those are the rods plugging in from the upper arm, and that gives me lower arms and upper arms that look like this. So basically 2 sections, both with 2-to-1 gear ratios off those servos. So we should have loads of torque, and we should be able to control everything really well. The head mechanism has 2 more of those servos, both with levers on that are going to push rods, and that's going to push a pan and tilt mechanism that's going to have the head mounted on it. And that means that we can both move the head sideways and up and down, or any combination of those, by moving those servos independently. With a quick animatronic test complete, it's time to make the other pieces for the cosmetics, which is more foam templates and more big foam parts made out of EVA foam, just like cosplay armour. All these pieces were test fitted as we went to check they're the right scale and to check the robot could still move and everything was going to be good with the animatronic structure. The Shackled Shadow has a big disc on top, which is where your player character stands, so Billy had to cut these parts which are beveled to get all of the angles in there. So she's got this knife which basically you can set the angle and then you can cut any angle you want, and that was pretty handy for this. So there's so many bevels and so many round sections which all had to go together. So again, these were all made out of templates and then they were glued together. You can see that bevel coming together to give us that really good angle. I 3D printed these brackets, which are yellow, and those were fitted onto foam board, and then the bevel part fits on that, and that holds the angles precisely all the way around, so it's basically a former to get this dish looking uniform. There are lots of detail parts and lots of edges, which again are made with the bevel knife, and then they're cut, marked, pinned on, glued on, and that's lots and lots of pieces like that on the shoulders and on the chest plate and on that dish on top, as well as lots of little triangle parts and other details that were marked in the foam. While Billy was still sorting out some detail parts, it was my job to seal all the foam so we can paint it. So this is Polyprop's foam sealer. The first coat is watered down with white spirit, so it goes on nice and thin, and that gives us a uniform coating so the paint will stick, and also it's nice and smooth because some of that foam is actually quite absorbent. Billy had done some work on the head with foam clay to add those detail parts around the eyes and fill in some of the seams, but again that all needed sealing, so the eyes were masked off and the whole thing has to be uniformly sealed so that it all looks great and it's all smooth and the paint will stick uniformly all over. We were constantly doing animatronic tests to test all the pieces fitted, and what we're doing here is actually making sure that those shoulder bells and the chest plate will move with the arms. So there's some bungee cord on the left shoulder bell, you can see strung to the arm so it moves when the arm moves, and check that doesn't collide with the other pieces. The right one is just free and you can see that's wobbling around quite a lot. So this is going to make a massive difference. So it looks like it's time for some proper paint. With all of those pieces and their details faithfully recreated to match the game model, it's time to do something about them basically being stuck on metal sticks. So Billy set about making a sort of black morph suit made of a 4-way stretch fabric which covers all of those mechanisms and moves with all of those pieces. So that covers up the aluminium extrusion, all of the joints, all of those geared servos, all of the electronics and that head mechanism. So we've got a nice tight fabric suit on it that we can then stick some more fabric on to make the other effects. The arms are quite chunky, so some carbon fibre rod has been shaped around here. It's stuck into some 3D printed blocks with holes in, which are strategically placed, glued on the other 3D prints essentially, and also stuck into the foam at the bottom into the hand. And then more black fabric's been stretched around, and that's been blended in with paint, so we don't just get a sudden cut from the painted hands and other parts to the black fabric. So there's some blending there on the arms and also around the head. And we've got some lovely chiffon because some of these parts are kind of invisible in the game model, so this is getting stuck on to kind of blend the black morph suit part with reality, and then there's some other colours are going to go on top of that. On the whole thing's brown in the game, but there are parts of it which are completely see-through, which is obviously quite impossible to make. There's a hint of purple around the bottom, so there's a bit of purple chiffon as well, and then brown fabric has been put around all over it to give it the actual structure, which is what's visible in the game.
Right, we think it's ready. Do you think it's ready?
It's ready, my lord.
But will it balance on this ball?
Let's put it to the test.
Dear, oh dear James, all fades before the void.